Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Writers Workshop. Our topic tonight is creative writing, unleashing your imagination. And I am thrilled to welcome back local poet and co-founder of CU Poetry, Jim O'Brien.
Thank you, Salam. Thank you, Champaign Public Library, for having us. And thank you all for being here. This workshop has a fierce title, but it's really going to be pretty chill. We don't see any unleashing. There's some handouts. If you didn't get one at the back, looks like everybody has one. I'm going to use some poems for some examples, but the techniques and I don't like the word strategies, but I'll say strategies are things you can use in any kind of writing or other outlets. So, a little bit about me. Primarily a poet. Host the open mic at the Rose Bowl in Urbana every month. That is all spoken word is welcome, whether it's poems, essays, short stories, movie reviews, anything that you want to stand up and read behind a microphone is welcome. It's the first Tuesday of each month. Although July, next month, the first Tuesday is the 4th, so we will have to skip July, but we'll be starting back in August. I also do poems on tap, where I set up a typewriter and tap out poems for people on the spot. Co-founder of CU Poetry, which started right here and is starting to meet back again here at the library. And then I'm also one of the 3 curators of CU Haiku in the Champaign News Gazette. If you get the Champaign News Gazette, they have a haiku feature every Sunday that's in with the book reviews, and if you send those in, you can easily get it published. About writing, how many poets, any? How many fiction writers? Memoir, novelists? All right. So as you know, or as you should know, might know, November, which is coming up, is the annual NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month. So you try to knock out 50,000 words in 30 days. Highly recommend it. April is National Poetry Month, and the poets do a similar thing that doesn't make as fun of the acronym. I think it's APRO, right? Something. Anyway, we're going to have time for writing at the end. A prompt. If you need paper, there's blank paper at the back and pens, and or you may have a notebook, or you may not want to do a prompt. That's fine too. But our prompt is going to be dirty kitchen windows, and I'm going to tell you that now so you can think about it while I'm talking about all this other stuff. And then when we get to that point, you'll be ready to go with something. So, Salam had given me this level of unleashing your creativity, and I did a one last year that was sort of on creativity, and for this one we're going to go a little different direction. I'm going to talk about different places to find inspiration that are already out there and you may already know them. Places where I find inspiration for my writing. Sometimes it's songs and music. Sometimes it's food and drink. Sometimes it's other poems and writing or other works of art. And we're going to look at some examples for each of these. And of course, your own imagination, you can write about whatever you want at any given time. But sometimes I'll see something or hear something or read something, and it'll trigger an idea for something new and original. So we're going to start with songs and music. And this one, I don't have them in the same order as the slides, but this is a poem from an anthology that the Illinois State Poetry Society put out. It's called The Long and Winding Road by Ron Viejo, which I misspelled on the slide, but I hope I got it right on the paper, because it only has one eye. Nope, blew it both places. Apologies, Ron, wherever you are. So this was a poem that he wrote after watching a video of a song, The Long and Winding Road by the Beatles. Has everyone heard of the Beatles, at least? Okay, good. So you know how the song goes. Take a minute and think about the song, and then I'll just read this poem. Ours is the road they sing about that never disappears. It winds through forests of regrets and meadows deep with sorrows of a night that never ends, that no one hears, where once we drove, just scattered leaves from a faint breeze, where once our comfort laid, there is no longer love or sleep, just ghostly linen bed without a single crease. So I don't know if you'd consider that song happy, but this isn't nearly as happy. It's kind of sad. But anyway, Songs for Inspiration is one place to look. There have been, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but I've seen movies that came out of a single song, and sometimes that song is kind of thin. It's hard to build a story out of it unless you bring a lot into it, which I highly recommend. Next, we'll look at food, and this is a very, very famous, fairly popular, and often satirized poem by William Carlos Williams that is about some plums, or maybe it's not, but on the surface, it's about plums. And it's called This Is Just to Say by William Carlos Williams. I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me, they were delicious, so sweet and so cold. So we do have a description of the food, but we've also got a whole interaction going on between the narrator and their cohabitant who had plums in the icebox that are no longer there. And an interesting thing to me that I like about this, in that third stanza, that forgive me isn't a request, it's almost a demand. So there's such a layer that reveals so much of the relationship through his determination to eat those plums. So for you fiction writers, I highly recommend bringing in as many of the senses as you can, as often as you can. If somebody's out there, no matter where they are, put in the sight, the smell, the sounds, not the smell we have now, but the sounds, foods, the taste, the tactiles. Bring as many as the five senses in as you can to give your characters some depth. One of my writing coaches had said whenever he's writing a story or a novel, he wants to know what's in his character's icebox. So he thinks he'll think about the character and what does this character like? Does she like sweet foods or savory foods? Does he like opposite? What foods they eat? What drinks they drink? What physical comforts they like is a source of tension in a story, also in a poem. Can you think of any books that you've read where food is a prominent, almost a character in it? We had a fellow read here at the library, but it's probably been 10 years because those 3 years don't really count, who had a book about food and recipes, and I don't remember what it was. The Nashville does an anthology on tomatoes every year, so if you come up with a short story or a novella that involves tomatoes in any way, look up the Tomato Festival in East Nashville, and they are open for submissions every year for their anthology. Yep, that's it on foods. Okay, we're going to talk for a few minutes about using other writing as a launching point for your own writing. And these, I just have excerpts on the slides. I've got the full poems. The first two are on the page. This Frank O'Hara poem is called Having a Coke with You by Frank O'Hara. And this is just an excerpt, and he's says it's even more fun than going to these places. He's obviously talking about being with someone. A lot of physical descriptions, the color of the tulips, the smiles on the people's faces. I don't know why they spelled yogurt with an H in the 50s or 60s when this was, but maybe that's just a New York thing. So again, that's bringing in all of the sensory objects. And then you can read that poem if you wish. But this other fellow, Mark Leidner, wrote a poem based on that, and he titled it Having a Coke with You. And again, there should only be one having up there. I apologize. So then it starts out with the narrator and another character. You asked me if I knew the poem Having a Coke with You. I said I vaguely remembered, but didn't really, so you recited it in its entirety. And then he talks about trying to remember the last line of the poem. That's an instance of taking one poem and writing another poem on it. It's not exactly the same as a trilogy of novels, but you can take a novel and recast it, I guess, rehash it. We'll see that in a future example when I talk about films that are based on well-known novels and mythologies. But in any piece of writing, there are 5 really important questions for the author to think about. And it also applies to other works of art, like if a photograph or a painting, but especially a story or a poem. And those are, what's really going on here? So you as a writer have to understand the dynamic with your characters and how much of that you want to reveal at what point in the story or novel or poem. Do you want to open it with a big blow up and then backtrack to see how it got to that point, or have it build? There's a number of ways and a number of traditional formats with the story arc and how you want to build that tension. How did things get this way is the second part of that. What were they thinking? You want to understand what the characters were thinking. Are they being honest with each other? Is only one of them being honest? Are they both hiding things from each other? And then you need to know what's going to happen next. Like, especially with like a photograph, you see somebody riding a bicycle, you know that they were not standing still. They were not still in that moment. You know that they were pedaling to come there, and then the next minute they're moving forward. And you want your readers to anticipate that as well. You want them to have an idea, not an idea, but you want them to have a desire to know what's going to happen next. So you have that real page turner, or if it's a collection of poems, get from one poem to the next. And then the last one, did it have to be this way? And it absolutely has to. On a rare occasion, someone will say truth is stranger than fiction, because it is. If you're walking, anybody have a dog? I don't have a dog, but if I'm walking my sister's dog and I find $1,000 on the ground, and then I use it to buy dog toys. If I try to put that in real life, that could happen. It's crazy, but it could happen. But in a story, then you've got to also make it so that it's inevitable that that pile of money was on the same sidewalk that they're walking the dog on. You can't just say, well, and then this happened. It has to be laid out. Next, this is, so maybe nothing is original, or maybe everything is original. And I used this next one in a previous presentation, maybe 2 years ago. This is a painting called Landscape with the Fall of Icarus. And somewhere over here, you'll see a couple of feet kicking in the water. So that is Icarus, apparently. And so here we have an Icarus, anybody not know Icarus, the Greek mythology story character, built his own wings, used candle wax to hold the feathers on, and flew too close to the sun and crashed. So there we have a painting from 1555 by Peter Bruegel, I believe, depicting that. So we've got a visual art based on a written, originally oral, but a piece of writing. So you've got a story, and somebody makes a painting of it, and then 400 years later, again, William Carlos Williams, that just kind of happened by accident, but he writes a poem about the painting, but the painting's about the story. So is the poem, but the poem's not about the story, it's about the painting. So we're all standing on each other's shoulders in this quest to create art that is meaningful and can touch people. And I'll just read this quickly. According to Bruegel, when Icarus fell, it was spring. A farmer was plowing his field. The whole pageantry of the year was awake, tingling near the edge of the sea, concerned with itself. And I'm going to go back to the painting so you can see all these elements are in there. Sweating in the sun that melted the wings was insignificantly off the coast. There was a splash quite unnoticed. This was Icarus drowning. So Williams takes this painting and pretty much ignores the mythology and makes his own poem assuming all these things. So if you have a story or see a movie or read a book or read a story that really resonates with you, find a way to create something new that is not a direct ripoff, but, you know. And then sometimes the work comes from what's not in the art. Very famous painting, American Gothic. Most people have seen this. Anyone not seen this one before? Everyone. Classic art. And then you may know the story behind it. It was their, who was the dentist? He's a dentist. Grant Wood was the painter, and I think it was his dentist and his sister that he had posed in front of this barn with the pitchfork. But then here's a poem by John Stone who looks at that and brings his own elements into it, so that, you know, sometimes it's what's not in the art. So he starts his poem, just outside the frame, there has to be a dog, chicken, cows, and hay, and a smokehouse where a ham in hickory is also being preserved. Here, for all time, the borders of the Gothic window anticipate the ribs of the house, the tines of the pitchfork repeat the triumph of his overalls, and front and center, the long faces, the sober lips. And that's an excerpt. The rest of that poem is in here. It's the last one in there. And it goes on. These two, by now, the sun is high, ought to be in mortal time about their businesses. Instead, they linger here within the patient fabric of the lives they wove. He asking the artist silently how much longer and worrying about the crops. She no less concerned about the crops, but more to the point, just now whether she remembered to turn off the stove. So, you know, it's got a good ending, but it wouldn't all fit on the slide, so that's why we had to print it out for you. But it's just another example of taking something that already exists, thinking about it, and recreating it in a way that people may connect to the original, maybe not. It stands on its own. this poem not placed side by side with the painting would still work. If you know the title of the painting, you'd recognize the title of the poem. But even if you didn't, I would still be able to picture this story, this image that the poet has created. All right. So I talked about retelling of classics. A couple, I guess they're famous. I was aware of them anyway. There was a movie a few years back, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? A lot of bluegrass and Americana music. John Goodman, the handsome guy, George Clooney was in it. Anyone seen that? Right? So that's a retelling of the Odyssey from Homer, when they have the sirens in there, and John Goodman only has one eye. He's the Cyclops. So that's taking a really classical tale and totally bringing it into a different time frame. Another one, West Side Story, musical and film, of course, is Romeo and Juliet retold. So there's a lot of classics to mine. And there are probably more examples. Does anyone off the top of their head think of any movies? Yeah.
Rent, that's sort of a retelling of the opera La La Land.
Yes. Rent, the musical, and then a film version based on the opera La Boheme, which has been produced many, many places. And now Rent has been many, many places. But yeah, absolutely. Any others? I'm sure there's tons. But they're out there. And then you can also blatantly steal or borrow. Bob Dylan, who I happen to be sporting right here, takes a lot of his lyrics, especially the last 30 years or so, from Robert Burns, William Blake, Civil War poets like Henry Timrod. He's got a song that lifts The Great Gatsby pretty much scene by scene. So, of course, he can get away with that. You probably can get away with it too if you don't get caught. And even as long as it's public domain, then I say just go for it. But again, we stand on the shoulders of everyone that's gone before us, whether they were writers or filmmakers or songwriters or ancient Greeks. So don't hesitate to explore those. All of these, you can pull from these sources and write a poem, a story, a novel, a musical, a movie script, anything you want. Any questions before we get into the goofy stuff? No? So, there's this thing getting a lot of attention right now, this AI chat, and it is starting to make some ripples, mostly in non-artsy ways, but it is showing up in arts also. But it's not all bad. The last workshop I did here, I actually went to AI chat or chat GPT and asked for poetry prompts that we used, and it did all right. But you can go to that, it's just a website, and you punch in a question and it's gonna just keep spitting out answers. You can ask it, what should I write? Or ask it for prompts. But customize those. Think about, be as specific as you can. Otherwise, it's just going to say, write far-ranging things. So customize it. Also, if you're stuck, you said you're stuck in a place, go there, ask them, what do you think the character should do next? Give them an idea of what's been going on. And this is why there's a big writers' strike in Hollywood right now, because the temptation and, well, not temptation, the inevitability of this is going to threaten a lot of creative jobs and focuses. So whether we can get ahead of it now or find a way to incorporate it, I saw one person who's very much against it said it's not, because they say it's, this artificial intelligence, when you go to these chats, are generative, they're generative, spontaneous generatives, I don't forget. But he said, no, what it really is what he said, it's generative plagiarism is what it's going on, because it's pulling from everything that it's ever been fed and just grabbing different ideas to create it. So I tried that and put some prompts in it and asked for these specific prompts in different specificities. And when I said, please give me some unique 3-minute long writing prompts for a therapeutic poetry workshop, it was pretty good. It gave very small prompts about very general topics. It'd say, write about a healing, write about recovery. So that wasn't such a good prompt. And then I said, please give me 5 writing prompts for 10-minute exercises. And those were randomly specific, but I couldn't use them or bring them. And then just a wide open, may I have 10 writing prompts? And it's interesting to see those, because it will just say, write a story about a cat, write about a child that got lost. So they're not as useful when they're that broad, but if you give it a good, specific construct to work within, you may find some value in that. All right, are you still thinking about the dirty kitchen windows? All right, you ready to work on those for a bit? So let me get some paper myself, because I'm going to do it too. Let's take about 10 minutes and write about dirty kitchen windows, or some concept, some aspect of it. They don't have to be the focus, but somebody should encounter a dirty kitchen window in your 10-minute vignette, poem, and yes, and there's lots of paper in the back. Or if you have a keyboard, you can type it in, whatever. And this is what YouTube calls cooking music, so. Hi there. We're just having a free write on dirty kitchen windows in any context. And we have about 8 minutes left for that exercise. That bacon is burning. Just take 2 more minutes to wind these down, please. All right. Thanks for taking a shot at it. Anybody want to go first? I'll go first. Anybody else want to read? It's not mandatory, but if you want to, you can. And if you want me to go first, say nothing. All right. I'll go first. Dirty kitchen windows. We walked past that house 1,000 times on our walks. Me pushing the stroller, you carrying an array of entertainment for the baby. Spring through autumn for the 6 years we lived in Galena. Each time we passed the house, I marveled at the architecture, the gables, the chimney, while you liked the front porch. And then on our last year there, the for sale sign went up. We had never seen anyone go in or out, but we knew something had happened on a crisp night just after the harvest moon, with our daughter away at your mom's, we crept up to peek in. Curtains were drawn everywhere but the kitchen, whose windows we had to rub with our shirt sleeves to see through. The moonlight fell on an old gas stove, a pie rack behind that, and abandoned salt and pepper shakers shaped like angels, almost in an embrace, yet not close enough to touch. So there you go. Nowhere did I didn't, except for, what lack of a title, dirty kitchen windows, but I described them without saying they're just dirty. And they're looking from the outside in. Anyone else? We got a little time? Yes, what's your name? Pardon? Ari. All right, thank you. Please do. If you want to, come over here and get on camera. That's it. Is that okay, Solon?
Dirty kitchen windows were merely one of the many things that irritated Johann about his new flat. Combined with the constantly dripping sink, the soot on his walls, and the doors that would never quite close,
It made living in the flat a living nightmare. Yet it was all worth it, as this flat was in the very heart of Mergenshire, the city of progress and opportunity. It was often referred to as the Queen's personal research division, and for good reason. While an ordinary city would have street sweepers and milkmen and chimney sweeps, here all the ordinary drudge work was done by automatons, and it was done quickly. The city was truly a haven for scholars and other intellectuals who could not be burdened with daily life. Thus, as Johann inhaled the dirty air, tainted with the scent of the heavy smoke that pervaded the city, he smiled. The tea delivery automatons would be along shortly. He could already hear the clicking of their gears and the groan of metal on the streets below. Johann sat at the kitchen table, a small, round table, cluttered with notes and bits of clockwork that had a permanent musk of oil and ink clinging to it. Only a small section of it was clear, as that section was reserved for food and drink. With a flourish, he brought his notes from last night atop the pile of papers and produced a clockwork ink pen, another of Mergenshire's many marvels, a pen that would chew up written paper and extract the ink from it for reuse. Grinning, Johann gleefully tossed in some old, failed notes into the pen's input hatch and marveled how the ink container refilled itself. It was the small wonders like that that made life in Mergenshire worth it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Yes, big round. We had the automatons, so maybe futuristic, maybe steampunk, because the pen picked up paper and spit out, or picked up, that was amazing. Very nice, thank you. Anyone else? Cielo.
Kitchen windows justified.
Justified.
The robins built their nest in the bush right outside my kitchen window. I watched amazed at their creativity, using all kinds of stringy materials they could find. Dry grass blades, leaf spines, random threads, and the blue ribbons I discarded from my Christmas tree. When they were done, the female started her job, laid an egg a day until there were 5. The male is never far away. Then one morning I heard a squeak. 1 egg hatched, then the next, and the next. 5 hatchlings called for their parents all day long. The pretty little hatchlings, tucked safe, never noticed me, just a foot away on the other side of the blurry, dirty kitchen windows.
Very nice. The window's definitely justified. With a robin. Anyone else? Oh, absolutely. What's your name? Peggy, thank you. Peggy.
So I envisioned maybe some kind of agoraphobic. So were the kitchen windows that dirty, or had the world outside turned that hazy? Either way, it was fine. There was nothing out there for her anyway. She continued washing the dishes. Then a bird chirped, and she wondered if it was the robin that had built a nest in the tree in the backyard for so many years. She liked watching the eggs hatch and the birds spreading their wings and flying off. It didn't matter though, they'd never needed her before and didn't now. She held the glass up to the window, but without the sunlight it was hard to tell if it was truly clean. No matter, she just washed it again and set it in the drying rack. Someone was barbecuing. It had to be they were close by, for the smell got strong with the window closed. She glanced at the calendar hanging on the side of the refrigerator. That's right, the Smiths' annual barbecue next door. They always invited her, even though she never went. The delicious aroma grew stronger, and it was impossible not to inhale it. Her mouth watered. Someone pounded on the back door. She froze. No one ever came to the back door. Whoever had walked through the backyard to get there, she hadn't even been able to see them. She crept a few steps to the kitchen door, but the windows were so dirty there she couldn't see out of it either. Who's there? A little hand reached up and swiped a thin streak just big enough for eyes to peek through. That was little John from next door. Such a cute little boy, about 6 years old now. Come eat with us, we have plenty, called through the door. She opened the door and sun streamed in, almost blinding. The boy reached up his hand and she took it, one slow step at a time, out into the sun.
Oh, that's beautiful. So I know writing is a solitary act for the most part, but anytime you can find a tribe and write, you will be amazed at the way things intertwine, because we had 3 different pieces there. 2 of them had robins, 2 of them had hands cleaning a window. The connections develop, and it's fantastic. We have time for one more if somebody wants to. Yes, sir. What's your name? Sean. Thank you.
I call this caramel. Caramel came out all wrong. I don't really know what happened. It said to stir it thoroughly. I stirred and stirred and stirred. It was a thin, separated mess. No matter how much I stirred the damn thing. Disgusting. I thought maybe if I kept stirring, they would come together, but it never did. So I threw it at the window. I watched it drip down onto the floor. Then I went out and bought some dirt.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's awesome. Sometimes you have to make things happen. So I've got a few more slides here that I want to talk about. Different resources in town and here at the library. Shut Up and Write is a group that meets, Shut Up and Write Champaign, I think it's called. They meet online now. They used to meet in person, but now it's online. So I'm not retired yet, so I can't participate, but they meet online weekly on Tuesday mornings. And anybody here in that? Sometimes we get 1 or 2 here at the Writers Lounge when they happen. But in that, it doesn't matter what you're writing, they get together, talk for a few minutes, and then log out and write for an hour. When they used to meet in person, it was the same thing. A few minutes for social, and then everybody would be quiet and just write. So check those out if you want. Shut Up and Write is a website. There's also where they identify the chapters. The local group uses Meetup, which is a scheduling website as well. I mentioned earlier CU Haiku. If any of you want to write a haiku and send it to cupoetry@gmail.com, that would be great. Also mentioned the open mic at the Rose Bowl, first Tuesday of each month. Any spoken word is welcome. We've had folks trying out different chapters of longer works. Some improv, some spoken word, anything is welcome, just no guitars. That's happened. Someone showed up and said, it said open mic. I'm like, no. Yeah. And then the CPL, Champaign Public Library Writers Workshops. If you sign up, you can get a monthly newsletter, what's happening at the library. Go to their website and they have an events calendar that is very thorough. Also, they have a YouTube channel. So you see this camera, we are going to be on YouTube unless something fails. But you can look at, they do Solemn does a whole series of writers' workshops each year, and they're all out there, as well as their business workshops and anything else they do. So highly recommend checking into that. And then a couple times a year, they have 2 things here at the library, an open mic, which we just had last month, so it'll be a couple months before the next one. But by then, you'll have all signed up to the newsletter, and we'll be checking the events calendar. And then also a writer's lounge where she opens up this room, and people come in and meet each other and talk about what they're working on, what they're writing. And some of us met through that, so highly recommend it. And the next one is July 5th. Is that still on? Still correct?
Yes.
All right, so be careful. Come back from the 4th with all 10 fingers, and you can type away. And I think that's it. Any questions for me or Salam or each other? Talk about process. Ask if you got a really good writing process, please let us know. I also want to thank Salam and the Champaign Public Library and all of you for being here. My contact info is at the very top of that sheet if you ever want to reach out and say, when's that open mic, or what's going on next. My email address is on there. Feel free to reach out. Anything else? All right, thank you all.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. A big thank you to Jim. As always, really great prompts and really great advice.
Thank you.
Like Jim said, we'll be in this room next Wednesday, July 5th, same time, 7 o'clock, and that's just going to be a lounge. And that's, like you said, a chance to connect with fellow writers, share what you're working on, and just get advice and fellowship. So hope to see you there. Thank you so much for coming.